So, we had a message recently that really, well, it really stuck with us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a listener shared this surprisingly powerful experience about how their spouse intentionally scratches their feet.
Okay.
And it wasn't just, a tickle. It apparently unlocked this whole wave of pleasure and had all these other effects on their body. Pretty amazing, right?
Wow. Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
So that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've taken a pretty close look at the science behind it, used an AI analysis to sift through these sensory, autonomic, and perceptual responses to this very specific act, foot scratching.
And what's really interesting, I think, is just how intricate the nervous system's response can be to something that on the surface seems so simple.
Exactly.
So our goal today is really to unpack what's happening biologically. When this kind of intentional fit scratching occurs, we'll look at why it feels so good, what it might be doing to your muscles.
Right, they mentioned that. And the perceived blood flow, the relaxed nerves.
hmm And that really intriguing description, the air to the head, heart, and lungs feeling. We want to explore that.
Yeah, what is that? And also the morning after effects, feeling deeply rested, even stronger.
Right. So the mission, if you like, is to piece together these complex biological mechanisms, try and provide a clear and hopefully fascinating understanding of what's actually happening inside your body during this experience.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Let's get right to it then. That first feeling the pleasure, where does that actually start? Down in the feet, I assume.
It all begins right there, yeah, in the skin of your feet.
Hmm.
It's just packed, absolutely packed with tiny sensors, touch receptors.
Okay.
So when your spouse scratches your foot, that physical action triggers something called mechanoreception. Basically, specialized nerve endings firing off in response to that mechanical stimulus, the pressure, the movement.
And this happens on both the bottom and the top of the foot.
Yes, exactly. Both the smooth, glabrous skin on the sole and the hairy skin on the top and sides. They both have this rich landscape of different receptors.
So who are the main players here? We hear names like Merkel's discs, Meissner's corpuscles. What are they actually doing when someone scratches your foot?
Think of them as different specialists on the touch team. Merkel's discs, for instance, they're near the surface, really dense on the soles. They're what we call slowly adapting.
Slowly adapting, meaning?
Meaning they keep firing as long as the pressure is there. They're great for sensing sustained, light pressure, so that steady feeling of the scratch. Merkel's discs are likely signaling that constantly.
Okay, makes sense. Sustained pressure. What about the movement, the fluttery part?
That's where Meissner's corpuscles come in. They're also near the surface, again, especially on the soles, but they're rapidly adapting.
Ah, so the opposite.
Right. They respond best to changes in touch, to light touch, pressure changes, that low-frequency vibration or flutter. So the actual motion of the scratching, the changing sensation, Meissner's are key for that.
Got it. Steady pressure from Merkel's, movement detection from Meissner's. What else is in the mix?
Well, deeper down, you've got Ruffini endings, found in both hairy and glabrous skin. They're also slow adapters, like Merkel's, sensitive to sustained pressure, but they're particularly good at detecting skin stretch.
Skin stretch.
Yeah, when your skin is being scratched, it stretches a little, right? Ruffini endings pick up on that. They even contribute to proprioception, your sense of body position.
Huh. Interesting. Any others?
There are Pacinian corpuscles even deeper. They're rapid adapters, like Meissner's, but they respond best to high-frequency vibration and sudden pressure changes, probably less central to a slow, pleasant scratch, but they're part of the overall tactile input.
Okay.
And then kind of everywhere you have free nerve endings. Many of these signal pain and temperature, but there's a subset, sometimes called LTMRs, low threshold mechanoreceptors, that respond to gentle touch too.
Wow, so it's really a whole orchestra of sensors
Yeah.
firing off together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The overall sensation, including the pleasantness, isn't likely down to just one type. It's the combined activation pattern of all these different receptors, each encoding slightly different aspects of the scratch, the pressure, the movement, the stretch, the location.
But you mentioned earlier these C-tactile friends, CT fibers. You said they were special for the pleasant feeling.
Exactly. That's where things get really interesting regarding the affective quality, the how good it feels part. While the receptors we just discussed, the beta fibers, tell your brain the what and where of the touch very precisely.
The detailed map.
Right. CT efferents are different. They're unmyelinated, which means they conduct signals much more slowly, and they seem specifically tuned to the emotional, pleasant aspect of touch.
Slower signals,
Mhm.
but geared towards pleasure. How does that work? What makes them special?
Well, research shows they respond most strongly to a particular kind of touch. Slow, gentle stroking. Think caress-like movements. The optimal speed seems to be somewhere in the range of 1 to 10 centimeters per second.
Wow.
Yeah, often peaking right around 3 centimeters. So that careful, intentional scratching your listener described, it could very well be hitting that CT sweet spot.
The Goldilocks zone for pleasant touch.
Pretty much. And here's the kicker. The firing rate of these CT fibers correlates really well with how pleasant people actually rate the touch. It follows this kind of inverted U-shape curve.
Meaning.
Meaning too fast isn't as pleasant, too slow isn't as pleasant, but that gentle medium speed gets the highest pleasure ratings and the strongest CT firing. So that wave of pure pleasure, CT fibers are very likely a key source.
That's fascinating. Anything else about them?
They also seem to prefer touch at around skin temperature, about 32 degrees Celsius. So the natural warmth of your spouse's hand probably enhances their activation too.
Adding to the effect.
Definitely. And this links back to the listener's specific situation. CT afferents are strongly implicated in social bonding.
Social bonding. How so?
This type of slow, gentle touch is thought to be fundamental to signaling affiliation, care, and safety, especially between close individuals. It promotes those warm, fuzzy feelings, reinforces social connections. Think parent-infant bonding or the touch between partners.
Which makes total sense here. It's the spouse doing the scratching, adding that whole layer of affection and trust.
Absolutely. The context is huge. Now, there's a bit of a scientific wrinkle here.
Oh.
CT afferents are known to be abundant in hairy skin, like on your arms or back. But the traditional view was that they were much sparser, maybe even absent in glabrous skin, like the soles of your feet.
But the listener said it felt good, especially on the bottom.
Exactly.
Right.
Which presents a puzzle. There are a few possibilities. Maybe there are functional CT fibers on the soles, perhaps fewer than in hairy skin, but enough to contribute. Or perhaps the signals from those other fast-conducting A-beta mechanoreceptors on the soles, the Merkels, the Meissners, are being interpreted differently by the brain because of the context.
The brain knows it's pleasant touch from a loved one, so it labels those signals as pleasurable.
Something like that. The brain's affective circuits, like the insula and orbitofrontal cortex, might be processing those A-beta signals in a way that generates pleasure due to the overall situation, the gentleness, the relationship. It could also be a combination effect. Input from the soles, integrating with input from adjacent hairy skin on the sides or top of the foot. We know people can feel pleasant touch on the soles. The exact mechanism is just still debated.
Okay, so a little mystery remains on the sole sensation. But the key is this combination of different receptors sending signals. How does all that info get from the foot up to the brain? What are the pathways?
Right, so now we're talking about the neural pathways, the transmission routes. Think of them like highways carrying signals up the spinal cord to the brain. There are two main superhighways for touch information.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway, usually shortened to DCML.
DCML, got it.
This is the high-speed, high-fidelity route. It mainly carries signals from those fast A-beta fibers, the ones connected to Merkel's discs, Meissner's corpuscles, Pacinian corpuscles, Ruffini endings. It gives the brain really precise information about what kind of touch it is, where exactly it is, vibration, and also proprioception body position.
So the detailed sensory report, where does it go?
The signals travel up the spinal cord on the same side. Synapse first in the brainstem, specifically the nucleus gracilis for the lower body, like the feet, then cross over and go up to the thalamus, which is like a central relay station.
Okay.
And from the thalamus, specifically the VPL nucleus, they project to the primary somatosensory cortex, or S1. That's where you get that detailed sensory map of the body, the famous homunculus.
Right, the sensory homunculus where feet have their own spot. Okay, that's the DCML. What's the other main highway?
The other one is the anterolateral system, or ALS. This system also includes the spinothalamic tract, the STT, which is probably the best known part of it.
ALS, STTs. What does this one carry?
This pathway is primarily known for carrying out signals related to pain, temperature, and also crude touch, less precise than the DCML and itch. It involves smaller, slower nerve fibers, both A delta and C fibers.
Oh, so the C-tactile fibers might use this route.
That was the traditional thinking, yes. The signals in the ALS generally cross over to the opposite side much lower down in the spinal cord itself and then ascend. They also go to the thalamus, but potentially different parts than the DCML, including medial and intralaminar nuclei, and then project not just to S1 and S2, secondary somatosensory cortex, but also strongly to areas involved in emotion and body awareness, like the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC.
Okay, so a different route hitting more emotional centers. That seems to fit with pleasant touch.
It does seem to fit, and neuroimaging studies do show activation in the insula, particularly the posterior insula during CT optimal touch, supporting this idea. The insula is really key for interoception sensing your internal bodily state and emotional awareness.
But wasn't there a surprise you mentioned? A challenge to this view.
Exactly. This is a really key point. Studies were done on patients who had undergone a procedure called anterolateral chordotomy.
What's that?
It's a surgery where parts of the ALS pathways in the spinal cord are severed, usually to treat severe, intractable pain. Now, these patients lost the sense of pain and temperature on the opposite side of their body below the lesion, as expected, because those signals travel in the ALS.
Right.
But crucially, when researchers tested them with slow, gentle brushing, the kind that activates CT fibers, these patients still reported feeling the pleasantness of the touch on that side.
Wow. Even though the main supposed pathway for that signal, the ALS, was cut.
Precisely. It was a major finding suggesting that the pleasantness aspect of CT touch couldn't solely rely on the classical spinothalamic part of the ALS ascending to the thalamus and insula. There had to be other pathways involved, or at least parallel routes.
So what are the alternative suspects? Where else might that pleasant signal be going?
Well, one candidate that's gained attention, especially from animal research, is the spinoparabrachial pathway.
Semiparabrachial. Okay.
Yeah, it involves specific neurons in the spinal cord's dorsal horn that seem to get input from both gentle touch receptors and pain receptors. These neurons project up to an area in the brainstem called the lateral parabrachial nucleus, or PBNL.
And what does the PBNL do?
The PBNL is interesting because it connects extensively with areas involved in emotion and motivation, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, parts of the thalamus that project to the insula and ACC. And there's evidence this pathway might encode the valence of a stimulus, whether it's good or bad, based on the intensity of activation. Low activation might signal pleasantness, while high activation signals aversion or pain.
So a different route hitting those emotional centers via the brainstem. Any other possibilities?
Another hypothesis that's been floated is the postsynaptic dorsal column pathway, suggesting that maybe some signals related to affective touch might actually ascend within or alongside the dorsal columns, the same general area as the fast DCML pathway, but perhaps synapsing first in the spinal cord. The picture is still being filled in.
It sounds like it's definitely not just one simple pathway then.
No, it's complex. And here's another crucial layer. While CT fibers seem essential for the pleasantness, the conscious perception and intensity rating of that pleasant touch seems to heavily rely on input from those fast A-beta fibers traveling in the DCML.
Really? The fast ones are needed too?
It seems so. Studies on patients with a beta neuropathy who've lost function in those large fibers show they might still detect a vague pleasantness from CT touch, but it's often poorly localized and less intense. Nerve block experiments that temporarily shut down A-beta fibers show similar results.
So you need both systems working together.
It appears that way. You can think of it like the A-beta system, DCML, provides the detailed sensory canvas, the where, the what, the texture, the pressure intensity, while the CT system paints the emotional color onto that canvas, the how good it feels. Both seem necessary for the full conscious experience of pleasant touch.
That's a really helpful analogy, a team effort again. So once all these signals from different fibers, possibly via multiple pathways, arrive in the brain, which areas light up? You mentioned a few already.
Right, it's definitely a network. The posterior insula seems key for processing the effective interoceptive quality. The orbitofrontal cortex, OFC, is crucial for evaluating the reward value. How good is this feeling, essentially? And the OFC's response can be modulated by things like who is doing the touching.
Ah, the context matters there too.
Absolutely. The primary and secondary somatosensory cortices, S1, S2, are involved in processing the sensory details, though interestingly, some studies suggest you might not strictly need S1 activation to feel the pleasantness itself, even if it helps localize it.
Okay.
Then you have the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, involved in the emotional and motivational aspects. Reward centers, like the ventral striatum, show activity. And areas like the amygdala and hypothalamus are likely receiving input, perhaps via that spinoparabrachial pathway, linking the touch to emotion and basic physiological drives. And the thalamus, of course, acts as a critical relay, likely routing different aspects of the touch signal to these various cortical and subcortical areas.
So it's really a brain-wide conversation happening.
Pretty much. It's an integrated process across multiple fiber types and multiple pathways, all converging on this distributed network that analyzes the sensation, assigns emotional value, and triggers reward responses.
Okay, that covers the sensation itself and the pleasure. But the listener also mentioned physical changes, muscle stimulation, blood flow, nerves relaxing. That sounds like the body's automatic system's getting involved, right? The autonomic nervous system.
Exactly. Now we're shifting focus to the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. This is the system controlling all those involuntary bodily functions, heart rate, breathing, digestion, blood pressure, sweating, things that happen automatically.
And it had those two main branches, the fight or flight and rest and digest.
That's right. The sympathetic nervous system, SNS, gears you up for action, increases heart rate, tenses muscles, directs blood flow away from digestion, that's your fight or flight. And the parasympathetic nervous system, PNS, does the opposite, slows heart rate, aids digestion, promotes relaxation, that's rest and digest.
And it sounds like this gentle foot scratching is strongly activating the rest and digest system.
Precisely. Pleasant, gentle touch, especially in a safe social context, tends to shift the autonomic balance away from sympathetic dominance and towards increased parasympathetic activity.
How does that happen? What's the mechanism?
A key player is the vagus nerve. It's the main nerve of the parasympathetic system, connecting the brainstem to many organs. Gentle touch signals, processed through those effective touch pathways we discussed, can influence brainstem centers that control vagal outflow, essentially telling the body to calm down.
So the pleasant feeling triggers the vagus nerve to tell the body to relax.
That's a core part of it. And interestingly, studies have shown that even rhythmic touch that isn't perfectly CT optimal speed can still induce parasympathetic activation, suggesting multiple tactile inputs might contribute to this relaxation response, not just CT fibers.
So it's quite robust. Does it happen instantly?
It's likely a dynamic process. You might get a very brief initial orienting response, maybe a flicker of sympathetic activity as your body registers the new sensation. But if the touch is perceived as safe and pleasant, that's quickly overridden by the dominant shift towards parasympathetic activation.
And the fact that it's a spouse doing it probably massively enhances that parasympathetic shift.
Absolutely huge. That social context is critical. Remember the link between CT afferents and social bonding. That activation itself might promote PNS activity. Plus, the touch likely triggers the release of hormones like oxytocin.
The love hormone.
Right. Oxytocin is known to reduce stress, promote bonding, and it also directly facilitates parasympathetic activity. And then there's the top-down cognitive appraisal. Your brain understanding this is safe, this is pleasant, this is caring touch for my partner. All these factors work together to amplify the relaxation response.
So what are the measurable signs of this shift? If we hook the listener up to monitors, what would we see?
We'd expect to see several things. Heart rate would likely decrease. Heart rate variability, or HRV, would likely increase.
HRV, what's that telling us?
HRV measures the natural variation in time between heartbeats. Higher HRV, especially certain measures of it like HF-HRV or RMSSD, generally indicates greater parasympathetic influence and better autonomic flexibility, basically, a more relaxed and adaptable state. We might also see changes suggesting reduced sympathetic influence.
Okay, slower heart rate, higher HRV. What else?
Respiration tends to become slower, deeper, and more regular, more diaphragmatic breathing. Blood pressure generally decreases.
Lower blood pressure makes sense.
Skin conductance level, which reflects sweat gland activity controlled by the sympathetic system, might show an initial increase, possibly related to the emotional engagement or intensity of the pleasure, but the overall picture from heart rate and breathing points strongly towards PNS dominance.
And hormones.
You'd expect to see a decrease in levels of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, and potentially an increase in oxytocin levels, although that's sometimes harder to measure peripherally.
Okay, so a whole suite of physiological changes indicating a shift to rest and digest. How does that then translate into the specific things the listener felt? The muscle effects, the blood flow, that air feeling.
Right. Those subjective experiences are the direct result of this underlying autonomic shift. Let's take muscle relaxation first.
Okay.
When the parasympathetic system ramps up and the sympathetic system dials down, the neural signals that maintain background muscle tone are reduced. Muscles that might have been holding unnoticed tension, maybe from stress during the day, start to release that tension.
So the feeling of nerves relaxed is literally the nervous system telling the muscles to chill out.
Pretty much, yeah. It's the decrease in that sympathetic, ready-for-action tone.
What about the muscle-stimulated part the listener mentioned? That still seems a bit counterintuitive if it's all about relaxation.
It does initially. It could be a subjective interpretation. Perhaps they're noticing the change from tension to relaxation, and that transition feels like a form of stimulation or activation. Or maybe there are some minor localized muscle reflexes in the foot itself right at the beginning of the scratch before the broader wave of relaxation sets in. But the dominant effect is definitely relaxation.
Okay, that makes more sense. What about the blood flow clearly feeling and maybe seeing the skin get pinker?
That's very likely due to vasodilation.
Vasodilation, the blood vessels opening up.
Exactly. The sympathetic nervous system generally causes vasoconstriction, narrowing blood vessels, especially in the skin and extremities, to redirect blood during stress. When sympathetic activity decreases due to PNS dominance, that constriction eases, allowing the vessels to widen passively.
So less squeeze on the vessels lets more blood flow through.
Right. Plus, the physical stimulation of the scratch itself and the warmth from the spouse's hand can trigger local vasodilation directly in the skin, possibly involving the release of local chemicals like histamine that increase vessel permeability.
So both central, ANS, and local effects contributing.
Yes. And this increased blood flow is what leads to that feeling of warmth, the visible pinkness of the skin, and the subjective sensation of improved circulation. It all contributes to that feeling of the tissues becoming relaxed and, well, better perfused.
Okay, that explains the blood flow. Now, the big one, that air to head, heart and lungs feeling. It sounds so profound. What's happening there? Is it literal?
It's almost certainly not literal increased air volume or oxygen saturation. It's a holistic perception, a subjective feeling arising from the combination of all these physiological shifts happening simultaneously.
Okay, break that down. What contributes to that feeling?
Think about it. Your heart is beating slower and more easily reduced cardiac effort. Your breathing is slower, deeper, less restricted, likely more from the diaphragm. Your muscles, including potentially chest and shoulder muscles you didn't even realize were tense, are relaxing. Your overall sympathetic arousal is dropping less physiological noise and agitation.
So everything is just calming down and working more smoothly.
Exactly. Your brain, through interoception, that sense of your internal body state, mediated by areas like the insula and ACC, the same areas involved in processing the pleasant touch and ANS changes, is reading this coordinated body-wide shift. It's registering low arousal, reduced physical constriction, and autonomic balance.
And that conscious readout feels like air, ease, flow.
Precisely. That feeling of air or lightness or openness is likely the subjective experience of homeostasis being restored, of profound physiological ease and lack of tension throughout the system. It's the feeling of deep relaxation manifesting as a global sense of well-being.
That's a really compelling explanation. Okay, so that covers the immediate effects. What about the next morning? The listener felt exceptionally rested, maybe even stronger. How does the foot scratching lead to that?
This really highlights the crucial link between pre-sleep relaxation and the restorative quality of sleep itself.
Makes sense. If you go to bed super relaxed, you sleep better.
Exactly. That state of parasympathetic dominance, the lowered heart rate, blood pressure, muscle tension, and mental calm induced by the foot scratching, creates the absolute ideal conditions for falling asleep easily and staying asleep. It counteracts the sympathetic hyperarousal that's often behind insomnia or poor sleep.
So it likely helps them fall asleep faster, maybe wake up less.
Very likely. It probably reduces sleep onset latency, increases total sleep time, and importantly, increases the proportion of time spent in the most restorative sleep stages, deep slow-wave sleep, SWS, and REM sleep. Fewer awakenings means more consolidated, higher quality sleep.
And what happens during that high-quality sleep, especially deep sleep, that makes you feel so good the next day?
That's when the major repair and recovery processes happen. During deep SWS, your body ramps up the release of human growth hormone, HGH.
HGH, important for repair.
Hugely important. It promotes protein synthesis, helping repair muscle microdamage from the day's activities, and general tissue repair. Testosterone release also occurs, important for muscle maintenance. At the same time, levels of cortisol, which is catabolic, breaks down tissue, are naturally low.
So a hormonal environment perfect for rebuilding.
Exactly. Muscle protein synthesis is enhanced. Your immune system is active in controlling inflammation, releasing anti-inflammatory cytokines. Energy stores like glycogen in muscles are replenished. Your brain clears out metabolic waste products. It's just a fundamental period of physical and neural rest and restoration.
And if the foot scratching helped them get more of that deep restorative sleep.
Then it directly connects to their experience of waking up feeling mentally and physically so rested, without muscle aches, feeling like their body is totally rested. It's the powerful synergy between achieving deep relaxation before bed and the subsequent high-quality restorative sleep that follows.
Plus the general benefits of good sleep, better mood, clearer thinking.
Absolutely. Improved mood, cognitive function, reduced fatigue. It all contributes to that feeling of profound restfulness.
Okay, that explains the restfulness.
Right.
But what about the feeling of increased strength and maybe needing less exercise? That seems like a bigger claim.
Yes, that's a really important point where we need to make a careful distinction.
Between feeling strong and being strong.
Precisely. There's subjective strength, how capable and energetic you feel, and objective strength, which is the actual maximal force your muscles can generate, something you'd measure in a lab or gym.
And the listener's feeling is likely the subjective kind.
Almost certainly. That feeling of strength in the morning is most likely a perception arising from a combination of factors we just discussed. The complete absence of muscle soreness or ache because overnight repair was so effective, significantly reduced perceived fatigue due to high-quality sleep, muscles being in an optimal state, relaxed, recovered, not tense, and a generally positive psychological state, feeling well-rested, mentally clear, and good overall.
So you feel strong because nothing feels bad or tired.
That's a big part of it. It's the lack of negative sensations, fatigue, soreness, combined with the positive feeling of being fully recovered. But, and this is the crucial part, this subjective feeling should not be mistaken for an objective increase in muscle strength or muscle size hypertrophy.
That requires actual exercise stress.
Exactly. Building or even maintaining objective muscle strength requires imposing a mechanical overload on the muscles, typically through resistance exercise. This stress triggers specific signaling pathways within the muscle cells that lead to adaptation, repair, and growth.
And gentle foot scratching doesn't provide that kind of stimulus.
Not at all. It's wonderful for relaxation and recovery, which are definitely supportive of fitness goals, but it doesn't provide the necessary stimulus for muscles to actually get stronger or bigger.
So the feeling is real, but the interpretation needs care. It's about recovery, not replacement for exercise.
Perfectly put. It highlights how powerfully our internal state, our interoceptive signals, our level of fatigue, our mood influences our judgment of our physical capacity. Sometimes that judgment aligns perfectly with objective measures, and sometimes, like here, it reflects recovery rather than increased capacity itself.
That's a really valuable clarification. Okay, stepping back a bit then.
Yeah.
If someone were to regularly induce this kind of deep relaxation, perhaps through this specific method or similar ones, what are the broader health implications? Could this be genuinely beneficial long-term?
Oh, absolutely. Regularly accessing this deep relaxation state, this parasympathetic dominance, has numerous potential long-term health benefits. It's essentially a powerful stress management technique.
Like reducing chronic stress.
Exactly. Chronic stress is linked to so many health problems. Regularly lowering stress hormones like cortisol, promoting calm, that's beneficial across the board. We've already talked about improved sleep quality, which itself has huge knock-on benefits for mood, cognition, immune function, metabolic health, you name it.
So better sleep is a major pathway for benefits.
Definitely. Also, enhanced mood and emotional well-being seem likely. Pleasant touch fosters connection, potentially modulates neurotransmitters associated with mood, and simply feeling relaxed more often combats symptoms of anxiety and depression.
What about physical things like pain or immunity?
There's good evidence that relaxation techniques, including massage, which involves touch, can help modulate pain perception. This might involve endorphin release, reduced muscle tension contributing to pain, or even direct effects of pleasant touch pathways on pain signaling in the brain. And by counteracting the immune-suppressing effects of chronic stress, regular relaxation could potentially support better immune function, though more research is needed there.
And heart health.
Digestion. Long-term stress management is definitely good for cardiovascular health, potentially leading to lower resting heart rate and blood pressure over time. And since the PNS promotes rest and digest, regularly activating it can improve digestion and alleviate stress-related gut issues.
So the listener's experience, while specific, points towards a really potent, personalized way to achieve a state with potentially significant wide-ranging health benefits, comparable to things like meditation or yoga.
I think that's a fair assessment, yes. It leverages the power of touch within a meaningful relationship to activate profound relaxation pathways.
Are there any caveats, though? Things we need to be mindful of?
Definitely a few important nuances. First, context is king here.
We touched on this earlier.
Right. The profoundly positive response is almost certainly amplified because it's intentional, gentle, affectionate touch from a spouse. The same physical stimulus from a stranger or unwanted touch could be neutral or even highly negative. Our brain's interpretation, influenced by social cues, trust, and relationship, is paramount. That top-down modulation is incredibly powerful, especially involving pathways linked to CT afferents and oxytocin release in social contexts.
Okay, context is crucial. What else?
We should be very clear. Despite the wonderfully restorative feeling, there is absolutely no scientific evidence that gentle foot scratching can alter your underlying genetics or reverse the biological aging process. Those are entirely different mechanisms involving cellular processes far removed from this. Promoting health and reducing stress might slow some aspects of aging, but it's not reversal.
Right, important distinction.
Yeah.
Does age affect how someone might experience this?
Touch perception does tend to change with age. Generally, sensitivity can decrease, thresholds for detecting light touch might go up, and the ability to pinpoint touch precisely might decline. This is due to changes in receptors, nerve fibers, and maybe slower central processing. Pain thresholds might sometimes increase too.
So an older person might feel it differently.
Potentially, yes. The intensity or quality might be perceived differently. However, the fundamental benefits of relaxation and positive social touch certainly remain relevant, perhaps even more so throughout life. It's also worth noting that chronic pain conditions, which are more common with age, can sometimes alter touch processing centrally, leading to things like allodynia, where normally non-painful touch becomes painful. But for most, gentle touch remains pleasant.
And what about effects on specific organs? Is it making your heart or lungs function better directly?
The positive effects on organ function are primarily indirect. They stem from the systemic effects of reduced stress, improved autonomic balance favoring the parasympathetic system, and potentially better circulation due to vasodilation. There's no evidence it causes direct structural changes or specific enhancements to organ capacity beyond these consequences of overall physiological balance and relaxation.
Got it. Indirect benefits through overall system balance. Okay, so bringing this all together, this deep dive has been, well, pretty deep. We started with a seemingly simple act, a spouse scratching feet, and ended up touring the nervous system.
It really is a fascinating journey, isn't it? From those specialized receptors in the foot skin, detecting the nuances of the touch.
Yeah, the Merkels, Meissners, and those special CT fibers for pleasure.
Up through those complex neural highways like the DCML and potentially multiple effective pathways involving the ALS, spinoparabrachydactyl tracts.
Right, heading to that whole network in the brain insula, OFC, ACC, figuring out what is it and how good is it.
And then triggering that profound shift in the autonomic nervous system towards relaxation, the rest and digest state.
Which then manifests physically as muscle relaxation, vasodilation, slower heart rate, leading to those feelings of ease, warmth, and that incredible air sensation.
And ultimately setting the stage for truly restorative sleep, explaining that morning after feeling of being deeply rested, even if the strength part is more subjective recovery.
It really connects the science directly back to that personal experience the listener shared, validating those seemingly surprising effects with the underlying biology. It's definitely more than just a nice feeling.
Absolutely. It's a powerful demonstration of the mind-body connection mediated by intricate neurophysiology.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening?
Yeah, perhaps consider. What other seemingly simple interactions or sensory experiences happen in your own daily life, things you might barely notice? Could they also be having these kinds of profound, complex effects on your nervous system, your stress levels, your well-being, just beneath the surface of your awareness?
That's a great point. Maybe we should all pay a bit more attention to those subtle connections, the quiet ways our body and mind respond to the world and each other.
Definitely something to think about.
This is DigitView.